What do you get when you mix baseball and football?
Base footballs?
No. This is Bunts and Bruises. If it's the weekly hot topics in sports, we're talking about it.
We're talking about it.
And we're having fun. Your home for sports and entertainment. We're the best at rolling with the punches. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. This is Bunts and Bruises. And here's your host, Bars.
It is a beautiful day to talk about sports as always. Sports as always. See, I'm just excited because the guest we haven't had him in quite some time today. It's going to be a little different. We're going to not talk about the general hot topics of the week. We're going to dive into something that he believes isn't being spoken enough. And when you start listening to it, it really isn't. And I'm not a brainiac. I had to put my glasses on today to get into the right mode, get into my educational side. But this is one of those things where it's going to be related to some injuries, but the good doc, he also likes talking about the good things. So he's going to teach us about some fundamentals and communication that isn't happening enough. It's a whole thing. I'll let him get into it. But of course, without having an interview, I can't do it without my main man, the Iceman, Jerg. How we doing today?
We're doing beautiful, everyone. We're doing beautiful. A little bit of technical difficulties before the show, which will not be spoken of, and hopefully, let's be real here, it's probably going to happen to me again next time I have to do a show. But irregardless, Bars, I'm super excited. The second you told me that the good doc was going to come back and he was going to grace us with his presence again, I had to make sure that I freed up my schedule and made sure I was here for this. He was awesome last time. Educational, funny, like everything you wanted a guest and more. Doc was amazing last time, and now he's back to grace us with his presence again. It's outstanding. This is going to be one of the most educational episodes of B&B yet. Fun
fact, we were a young podcast when we first had him on. We're a little older now. We're past the year mark, Congratulations to us. A wise man once told me on our second episode, we're in the 5% of podcasters because they never get past the first episode. So we got to be somewhere in the top 2% now. But either way, in our young podcasting career, when we had the doc on the first episode, that was our highest watched, rated, everything episode. So I can't imagine what this one's going to be because this one's even better. But without further ado, let me go ahead and bring in the good doc, Mr. Dr. John Lopez. How are we doing today, sir?
We're doing great. Ready to talk about anything and everything, man. Glad to be on with you guys, man.
This has been long overdue, Doc. We haven't had you in quite some time. We and you've been talking, off the show about we got to get you back on. It's been delayed because, we're both busy people. You're a busy man. I'm the busiest man.
It is what it is, but
everyone knows. But exactly, here we are. We made it happen, and I'm excited to talk about it. When we were talking off the set, I'm acting like I'm an actor off the set. So when we were behind the scenes,
backstage,
exactly. When in the cut, I asked you. I straight up was like, "Hey, man, what's something you don't think is being talked enough?" Because there's just a lot of insight you get from that sports medical that even an average citizen, as long as it's broken down in layman's terms, it's really just mind-opening stuff that you never think about. And you could just see how one thing leads to the other. And we were saying right before the show started how we don't even really have a whole scheme of what to do because it's such a deep and general topic. And really what we're going to talk about today is what you told me. Injuries are occurring more often than they should because it's overall lack of communication almost between the entire team of the health, the coach, the strength and conditioning. And really, when that's all not, what's the word I'm looking for? Starts with a C. Either way, when that's all not connected, it really shows how one thing can affect the other. So you're talking about, let's say, a certain motion. A quarterback's changing the way he's throwing because he wants to try to assert more from the legs. But then you got the strength coach who is clearly working the legs out, but for a different reason. I'm not going to try and act like I know what I'm talking about here, Doc, but tell me exactly, how is it that you believe this situation could be solved? Because it's almost like in business, how if you're not having sales, marketing, and the shipping departments all working together, how are you ever going to make a sale? So we're all trying to get the one goal of someone being successful. So how do you think that could be solved?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is bringing it back to the communication aspect. So, kind of what you were highlighting with coaches, and the biggest thing is the communication between the coach and the rehab officials. See, now the rehab guy, myself, the PT, is pretty much going to be treating them always in a controlled environment, things like that, treating them in the clinic. The problem is that once we get them to a point where they're functional, quote unquote, now you get to a point where they go back to their strength coach, they go back to their quarterback coach, whoever the case is. And what they start doing is kind of working back from that injury. The problem is that they didn't address really anything that was the cause of the injury in the first place. Now we get them to a point where, for example, I get somebody in here who's a baseball player. He's got a shoulder injury. I can get him to the point where he's at least, more mobile. He's got more strength. But then he goes back to the pitching coach, and the coach himself is trying to change his mechanics and do all these things. The problem is that we're not seeing, is their body actually physically able to do the movements that these coaches are asking? And that's the biggest disconnect, is that there's not enough communication between myself and a coach, but I talk all the time with the doctors. And from a medical perspective, yeah, they get surgery or they get seen by an orthopedist. Yeah, I mean, I can talk to them and basically get them to where they need to be from a functional perspective, like I said. But what's happening is that a lot of these coaches are asking these kids, and I'm going to say kids because it's really starting at the little league pee-wee level, where they're basically making these kids do all these movements, do all these things, and they can't do them because their body physically actually can't turn. Sometimes they have a limited trunk mobility. They can't turn their body. How are you going to ask them to throw a ball, baseball, football, whatever it is, if they actually don't have the mobility to do it? And so the big thing is, I would say, starting off is communication. Got to get more communication between coaches and rehab professionals, because what that's going to show you is the doctor really is going to take care of, okay, you see him, you got injured, okay, go to PT. You got a surgery, okay, we'll do the surgery, go to PT. So again, the doctor's really not there throughout the whole process once you're way far out. They pretty much take care of the beginning part, and then the rest is up to the coaches and rehab staff. And so that's where that communication needs to be built upon more.
So first thing I want to bring up is some people are going to get confused when we're saying communication. It's not really, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not really the doctor coming in and going to the coach. No, he needs to start throwing like this because this is going to excel with this. No, it's the coach needs to relay what he's doing. Maybe even sitting down and watching some film together actually might be the best way to resolve this, I think. And really, the rehab guy isn't going to be giving the coach the X's and O's. It's really just you want to work together. Yes, it's the coach's main goal is to beat the opponent of that week. If we're talking football or baseball, correct the swing, correct the pitch, or even in basketball, the way a player shoots. For example, Jurg was mentioning Markel Fultz. I believe he had a question about that for you.
Yeah, Doc, I remember before this, when James brought the topic of what we're going to discuss today, I was extremely excited because I think this is one of those things that unless you're in this field, you don't really understand what goes into it. And I really wanted to point out Markel Fultz specifically because I think at the last couple of years, he's one of those guys that really stick out in terms of what happened to him. Early in his rookie season, he ended up suffering a shoulder injury. I forget how many games he ended up trying to play through the injury with before the team ultimately decided to sideline him. But it was a whole ordeal, as anyone that followed the NBA during that stretch knows, is that he sat out the remainder of his rookie season and a vast majority of his second year. And it was a whole thing where they actually ended up having Fultz and a trainer that he ended up getting had to actually redo his shooting motion. And there were issues with his shoulder the whole time. His shooting motion looked very weird, and a lot of people were wondering what was going on. So maybe not in terms of exactly what happened there, because obviously still to this day I don't think we really understand. But what do you think from what we're talking about today? What went into the issues that Markel Fultz had to endure during that time, and how just over scrutinized it was? Because he caught a lot of flack from so many different people when really none of us understood what was happening to him.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is that the injury happened. That's the first thing that started everything. He injures his shoulder, sits out for that major part of the year, and then now he's starting to correct his form. Now, the first thing is that his shooting form was already away before the injury, but now his shoulder is moving in a different way, in a different manner. His body, now that he has an injury on him, is flowing differently. It's not the same. And so what you try to do is, of course, you try to restore what they already had, right? Which was his already original shooting motion, right? But when you start to realize that maybe his shoulder wasn't able to move fully in certain ranges, which he was able to do prior when he had his original shooting form, but now he has to kind of change it up and go in that way. Now, the biggest thing that he's, NBA player we're talking about, right? So he's had years and years and years and years of shooting in this specific motion, and got better at it to the point where he's able to get drafted, right? But the problem is now is that he's got all of that mental makeup. He's got all of that as far as his motor plan on how to shoot. And now we're pretty much completely changing that. And so the biggest thing is that in that case, again, I don't know the full details there, but it should have been a talk. There should have been a talk between the shooting coach and the rehab professional, the PT. There should have been some kind of communication because that kind of communication can bridge the gap when it comes to, hey, the PT is telling this guy, you know what, his shoulder's really not moving in the same way. You might have to tweak it here and there, or there may be other things that could be affecting his shoulder, like his core, his spine, different things like that. So there's a lot of other things that a lot of people don't seem to realize. And you can even, take this to every sport. If you look at baseball, not every pitcher throws the same. If you look at baseball, not everybody hits the same and has the same swing. If you look at basketball, not everybody has the same shooting motion. And football, same thing. Not everybody has the same quarterback or throwing motion as far as quarterbacks. The reason that is because your body, everybody's body's different. So they're figuring out how to do these things in different planes, in different motions, in different ways, right? So to kind of wrap that all up, the biggest thing is it's like you can't do one size fits all with a lot of these athletes. It just doesn't work. And that's why sometimes you see a lot of stalling when kids go to these pitching coaches, they go to these hitting coaches, shooting coaches, football, all that stuff, training, because the trainer is trying to get everybody to do it in what he thinks is the best way. The problem is that you're ignoring, can the athlete that you're working with even do what you're asking them to do? Physically, can they actually reach their arm up? Can they actually extend their arm when they throw? Do they turn their torso when they turn? These are small things that, obviously with an untrained eye, you're not going to be able to pick up on. But because we have these rehab professionals, and there are many of us, that should be something that should be paramount as far as like priority, as far as communication list. Somebody comes back from an injury, I got to talk to that. I got to talk to the PT because he's going to tell me exactly how he was going throughout his rehab. Is he ready to even go back into full practice, full contact, all that kind of stuff? You hear that all the time, right? He's going back and he's just shooting. He's not taking contact, or he's doing, this and that, because the rehab professional is saying he's not ready for X, Y, Z, but he needs to work on all these things to kind of get his mechanics back and sound.
Yeah.
It really, I love how you mentioned it really takes a trained eye to see these rotations or these tweaks, because like Jurg said, he got a coach to change his shot. And then right after that, I believe it was like December 2020, Markel Fultz tore his ACL. Now, although we're talking about the original injury was a shoulder injury that he got surgery on, like we said, the coach did try and change the shot. Is that somehow possibly related, that since the shot was getting changed, it had some kind of an effect on, I guess, his stance or how he was taken off, and how it could have maybe directly led to that ACL tear?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely related injuries when you have one injury to start off. One of the biggest things I see is actually in my practice, what I see a lot is knee injuries that are caused by hip dysfunction, which then are caused by spine dysfunction, which could actually reach all the way to your shoulder. A lot of things are connected, especially when you talk about sports where you're using multiple joints. In other words, if I'm shooting, I am jumping, I'm shooting up with my arms, even driving to the basket. I'm driving to the basket, I'm bending the knees, I'm getting into the hips, I'm moving my torso. Same thing with baseball, same thing with football. You're moving multiple joints as you're performing these athletic feats, right? And so if one area is not working properly, if one area is dysfunctional, well, then another area of your body is going to try to compensate for the lack of whatever's going on in the one body part. But if then that is deficient, now you're compensating more. And so to kind of wrap that up, he may have had a shoulder injury that may have affected his torso, that may have affected his hips, that's now affecting his knee. And so things can be very connected with that very fast. We see that a lot. The biggest thing I see is in my clinic is baseball pitchers, right? A lot of pitchers come in and we look at their shoulder. All right, well, they got great shoulder motion. So why have you torn your labrum? Well, you look at their torso and they can't even move their trunk. Well, how are you going to get any torque on the ball? Now, because you can't turn, your trunk is stiff. Now your hips are doing more to try to get that ball over. Now your knees are doing more. So it can cascade. And when it cascades, it goes tenfold to each side, each joint it gets to. And because the reason is I'm not trying to teach X's and O's. I don't call coaches and I say, hey, this guy needs to get hit over the ball more, start throwing the slider, throwing the changeup. I'm like, let me see you turn your forearm, and I can tell you whether or not you can throw a curveball or changeup. That's what I'm talking. That's what I do. I actually, I get these athletes in here. I'm like, okay, turn your forearm, turn your palm away from you, turn your palm towards you, right? Can you turn your palm to face you? You can throw a curveball. If you can't turn your palm all the way away from you, then you can't get inside on a changeup. That's just physically your body cannot do that. And so I asked him, hey, what pitches do you throw? Fastball, curveball, changeup. Do you have trouble with your changeup? Yeah, I can't get inside the ball. It's because your forearm physically won't let you do that, right? So those are things that we work on to get them better. Oh, they got more motion. Now they can throw their changeup. I didn't change any mechanics. I didn't change their trunk angle. I didn't change their arm slot. I didn't change any of that. I just changed their ability to move, and they can keep their arm slot. That's kind of the gap that just this whole topic that we're talking about. That's the gap that needs to be closed. Whereas it's like I'm telling the coach, I'm saying, listen, you want this guy to throw harder, but he can't throw harder if he doesn't get more hip mobility. He can't throw harder if he doesn't stabilize his spine better. So it doesn't matter what kind of velocity programs you're going to put him on. He's never going to throw harder because he doesn't have the physical ability to do that. And that's what separates an athlete that maybe peaks out in college versus somebody who goes to the next level and actually makes it to the pros. It's the ability to take that information early on and work on it. Now, obviously, there's God-given talent that, always has a percentage of it, but that extra percent of, hey, am I actually working on my mobility? Am I working on my movement? Because that, when you're moving multiple joints, is what needs to be addressed.
See, that's definitely where you could tell that's where the gap is, because I love how you put it where you're not saying the X's and O's, and you said they're unable to throw a changeup, and the moment a coach hears that, you can already tell he's going to go ahead and put a whole stink face. Like, what do you mean the kid can't throw a changeup? I've been telling him to throw it. But you're not saying he can't throw a changeup. You're just saying he's unable to throw a changeup at the moment.
Exactly.
Let's change it where he can throw the changeup. That's definitely where the lack of communication from. And it's kind of crazy how you could definitely see that lack of communication still probably happening in the pros, but it's definitely happening more in high school and with the or these college athletes that you also deal with, because you're not having these personal conversations with their coach or even the PTs. Like you said, you can reach out, but they're not reaching out to you as if this kid was making hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right.
So that's really the little bit of a scary side, because like you said, there is God-given talent, but at the end of the day, if you're not giving them the ability to use that God-given talent, they're getting capped at a certain point, which I think is kind of wild. Jurg, how do you feel this communication could kind of get corrected, or what do you think is the biggest issue for this communication to, become more fluid, and this stigma essentially of the doctors trying to tell the coaches exactly what is able or what they can and can't do?
I think it just comes from starting at the lower levels. I think that's kind of what we're getting at here slowly, is that we need, like everything, we need to build from the base up, and really where everything starts from, I think, is at the high school level, like Doc has mentioned, and especially to me at the college level. So Doc, before, obviously I'm trying to be as researched and prepared as I can for this, and I'm never going to sound smart when talking about this stuff, but
I'll fill in the gaps, man.
I did listen to the podcast that Bars had actually told me that that helped pique your interest in this. Jordan Palmer appearing on Ryan Russillo's show to talk about this. And one thing that that really struck a chord with me, and we always focus on this from like the on-court, on-field perspective, but now off it as well, the allocation and usage of resources, to me, is the big issue here. That, and I'm mainly focusing here on the Division I college level, because to me, the high school level, to an extent, you can sort of understand it. Now, I think it's more of a moral conundrum there, and like doing right by these young men and women that you have work with you. But I think really at the Division I collegiate level, we know the amount of money that Duke, Alabama, Kentucky, et cetera, end up making. And the fact that this is still happening at that level, to me, is the big issue. High school, I think there's a little bit of room of understanding and forgiveness. Yeah. But then when we go to the college level, and let's be real here, we're being nice when we talk about college sports teams and just call them college teams. They are brands. Kentucky and Duke are brands. 100%. Alabama football is a brand. So
100%.
To me, the fact that they're not doing that is the most concerning part. I kind of want to get it, from your perspective, is that why is it we always have all these advances? We always talk about advances in sports, both for on or off the field purposes and how they work. Why is it that in this specific aspect, why are we still so far behind the times in terms of helping these athletes' bodies just be right in general?
I think one of the biggest things is money. I think that resources, what you were saying, is a huge, huge thing. Now, if we're taking it to the high school level, for example, me here, Fort Lee High School, right? That's the closest high school that's by me. Their resources compared to St. Joseph's High School is completely different. There's a completely different balance when it comes to that. So they have more opportunity and more things to see. Most of the times when it comes to why things are lagging behind is because people just haven't seen it, right? They see when the guy gets injured, right? The high school, college athlete sees a pro get injured. Okay, the next time they see them is when they were back on the court already ready to go, right? They don't see the process from when they got injured to rehab to really getting their body moving right to getting to that point. And so the biggest thing is that the lack of resources that are spread around, because there's not much talk about this, because everybody looks at the medical doctor, the surgeon, as the top guy, right? He's the one who repairs the ACL. He's the one who, repairs the Achilles. He's the one who repairs all these things, right? And then it's like, okay, well, the rehab guy is that one that's actually getting him back to the court. You fixed what's medical, but then at the same time, you're losing what that is. And so the big thing is that we're lagging behind because we still see it as you're injured, you just heal and you'll get back. There's a why. Like, why did you get injured? Why did your body break down on you? And those are questions that most of the time athletes don't really want to hear, because what they want to hear is, when can I get back onto the court? And so I think it starts from the lower level, where I've done a bunch of these seminars with baseball teams, youth baseball teams up by me in Rockland County where I work. And we're doing, how long can you plank for? Can you even touch your toes? Like that's like, I ask simple questions. Like, can you touch your toes? And so those are the simple things. And I'm like, you know what? Like, those are things that we actually see. There's a couple of Major League Baseball teams that are actually implementing a lot of these movement screens and things like that. A couple of D1 schools to do that. But you're saying a couple of D1 schools. There are thousands. So there's no possible way that, unless the resources for each D1 school is equal, which it will never be, because of, you got big schools here, boosters, all that stuff. So that level playing field will never really be realized. But if I have the resources to say, hey, I can go in here and talk to these kids and be like, listen, we need to work on, let's do a movement screen. Can your body, because I'm trying to make sure you don't get injured when we get to the season. The biggest breakdown is because people don't really know that it's available and what the power that we as rehab professionals have. I think it's still very people think it's like, oh, you got to pay a lot extra for that. That's like an extra thing aside from your trainer. It's another rehab professional, which, to be honest, if you find a good clinic, that's the problem. The other problem is that it's few and far in between of clinics and PT areas that actually do this kind of movement screen, this actual athletic preparedness, this youth sport athletic preparedness, because sometimes some clinics, have different goals as far as the type of patients that they see. So you could be an athlete and you're like, man, the nearest PT clinic that does this kind of stuff is, 50 miles away. That's like, sometimes that, and that varies between where you are in the country. And so the biggest thing is, like, we need to make sure that we try to get these resources and our names out there, just like Jordan Palmer was doing, is because you got to be able to reach the masses. And now this day and age, it's got to be, digital. Everything is, you're throwing up a video on a movement screen. You're throwing, you're putting something like you guys are doing, this whole thing here. My goal is to make sure that we get guys that are listening to this to say, hey, even with themselves, it's like if they do any other athletic activity, go to the gym, any kind of athletic activity, just make sure you're moving right. That's just for health. And we know health is wealth. So, you just got to keep going with what you're doing. But you got to make sure that your body can move right. And that's always a thing that, I always look at. And I want people to at least, have that ability to say, you know what, let me go look up some stuff that could be interesting to me, as far as like if they themselves participate in sports or any kind of athletic activity.
How receptive, my bad bars, but how receptive have those like kids and teams that you've actually given the seminar and spoken to them about this? How receptive have they been to it?
It's funny because at first, when you first start with them, they're like, when we take away, like, for example, we take away all the baseballs, all the gloves, it's like, put everything away. You just need your body. Right. So at first they kind of like are just like, oh, come on, what the hell is this? They kind of like get in their whole rut. But then we start actually going through these movement screens, and then we explain why these movement screens are what they are. And then when you translate it to an actual thing that's on the field, right, like the change-up example I gave you, or like the hip rotation and trunk rotation. I tell kids all the time, you get more trunk rotation, you get more hip rotation, and you get better with your core stability, you can hit that ball 50 feet farther. You see, you have to resonate with kids at this point, because the kids won't care about the fact that their shoulder or forearm rotates. They don't really care about any of that. They care how that's going to impact them on the field. And so you have to kind of get this sweet spot where you're telling them, hey, this is not working properly, and you're either A, going to get injured, or B, you're going to shorten your career by a lot. And so sometimes it's not necessarily scare tactics. It's actually what it is, because then inevitably there's one kid at least in every group that has gotten injured and has said, you know what, he's right. It's not wrong. And so once you get one kid to do that, kids will follow, and it kind of comes into that whole thing. So once you get to the point where you start showing them like, hey, this is what's going to affect you if you don't start working on this, then they start, okay, now I'm listening because I don't want to miss out on playing time. So that's a whole big thing. So they get receptive the more you kind of connect with them on how that affects their playing abilities.
I got to give you respect, Doc, because when you really think about it, aside from even them being just, young teens, even just athletes in general, I still consider myself an athlete. I do a little exercise
Exactly,
here
yeah.
and there, but we don't even like listening to like just, like you said, do this stretch or you're able to have this motion or whatever. I have Gene over here trying to correct my golf swing, and I'm just like, nah, man, this is what feels comfortable. He's like, it'll go straight if you do this with your hip. So I'm like, all right, maybe I'll give it a try.
Right.
So,
but see, that right there, can you move your hips so that you can actually hit it the way he wants you to hit it, right? That should have been the first question, right? Can your hips move
yoga,
to do that?
So there you go.
There you go. See, now we're in business.
Strokes, we're working on it, Doc. We're working
That's
on
it.
it. That's it. But just to even relate it more on the opposite side, we're talking about injuries here. If you look at Tom Brady and LeBron James, all the crazy things they do with their trainers, they're all focused on the core. And like you said, it's not even really weightlifting they do. They do more calisthenics where, like I said, yoga, you're stretching out. You're able to give your body certain rotations and movements. And I'm assuming that's really what prevents all these injuries from occurring, right? And my next question is, these athletes who are focused on one sport, because it seems like it's happening a lot more in this generation than it was in generations prior, where if a young high school athlete wants to just play basketball, they're playing basketball almost 365, no other sport, even in spring or summer. And same thing with baseball. You got all these travel teams, you got a fall ball, you got it all now.
Yep.
So my question is that affecting it as well? Because you're not getting a full range of body motion. You're not getting different things where, like, if you did football in the fall and then you did baseball in the spring and, wrestling in the winter, is it really just doing the same sport and following the same movements, kind of, I guess, suppressing that free range of motions?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you bring that up, because sports specialization is actually one of the biggest problems that's occurring now in youth sports. And the reason for that is because there's so many more leagues. There's so many more opportunities for you to continue to play. Same thing with the baseball example. You got a kid that's playing in the spring, they play for their school and they play for their recreational team. They play for summer, maybe even for a travel team. Then they're playing in the fall. If if their parents are wealthy enough, they go down to some warm state in the winter. They're going to a baseball camp for 2 months. By the time they get back to it, it's already February. And let's say you have 3 weeks before your next year starts. So you're talking about 3 weeks in a whole year of not doing your sport. The biggest thing here, and and I definitely want listeners to kind of hear, is that really sports specialization. People think like, oh, they can start choosing their sport pretty young. You actually don't want to specialize in a sport until you're about 15, 16, which to a lot of people, it's like, wait, so you're telling me I have to wait till my sophomore, junior year of high school to decide? And it's not necessarily that you have to make a full-on decision at that point. It's to say that up to that point, you should have at least been playing 2 sports in some fashion. You have to get your body to move in different ways. You have to get your brain to realize that, hey, we're not just moving in this one motion, right? If you're a baseball player and you're right-handed, everything is turning to your left, right? You throw turning to your left, you hit turning to your left, you even round the bases turning to your left, right? Because your body doesn't know what it's like to turn to the other side most of the time. And that's what we see with a lot of right-handed pitchers and right-handed baseball players and vice versa with lefties. The biggest thing is that we need to make sure that they're playing multiple sports, moving their body and giving them rest. This whole thing where these kids, they go in and they think, okay, if I just keep doing my sport, I'm going to get better. The problem is that your body, it has no idea how to move outside of that. And some of the best athletes you see have played multiple sports. You look at Aaron Judge, right? For example, guy played 3 sports, not only played 3 sports, but he played them well because his body, I mean, obviously God-given genetics when it comes to him, but at the same time, he still had to work to choose a sport. And he said, okay, I'm choosing baseball, right? So he still had to work to make sure his body was doing what he needed to do. And the big thing that we see is that these kids, they play one sport when they're 10 years old. 10, like, we gotta get your body to move. We gotta get you to do other things here, because the fact of the matter is that if you're not going to do that, you're just going to predispose yourself to injury. And you may not see it now, you may not see it in high school, you may see it in college though, when you start to get to ramping up your schedule, right? Because everybody thinks if I play more, my body's ready to play. And the fact of the matter is that at some point it's going to break down, because you're not going to be able to keep that up. Professional athletes don't keep that up. Let's keep that in mind.
Yeah,
Their sport is not all year round. So you're telling me that you're going to play more than a professional athlete and then still outlast them and get to that level? It's not happening. It's just not happening. I mean, you can look at any sport. They have, at least, obviously, aside from COVID, with these whole shutdowns and pushing back of seasons, shortened seasons, normal seasons, you're having a few months. And when these players are off, they're off. You don't see them, oh, I'm in the cages. Oh, I'm back on the court. Like, yeah, you got basketball. They got little summer leagues here and there. But those are for, like, the rookies and second-year guys who haven't really, played a lot during the year. So that makes sense. But if you're a main starter, you're a main player, they're taking off. And they have to, because they realize what a grind it is when they're actually in the season. So sports specialization, we definitely got to make sure that these kids are just playing different sports, getting their body to move in different directions, because they're growing still. There's no reason to lock yourself into one thing. I mean, you get these guys that come from overseas, right? Oh, I came here to play basketball, but you know what? I realized I'm actually pretty good at this football thing. They play football for 3 years. They're at a D1 school. Boom, next thing you know, they're getting drafted. Or like the guy that played rugby that got drafted, I think it was last year, right? Got drafted.
From 49ers,
Yeah.
I think.
Right, exactly. So you're looking like a rugby player. Okay, so his body, he's an athlete. So they can mold him to do what they need to do, right? And obviously we know that, like, when you have that ability, that's what coaches love, because now your body, it's like, okay, you're just moving super efficiently. It looks effortless. Professional athletes look effortless because they've worked to get their body to move that way. And then you go look at like a little league game and you're like, man, what the heck is this? It looks like choppy, right? Because it's like that's the growth and the progression for them to get to the point so that they can actually, be an athlete, not just a baseball player or football player or soccer player, like an athlete. That's what the take-home point is.
So what I think is crazy is you were mentioning how all these injuries eventually add up, and I think that leads to, like I said, this generation is just completely different, because even in the pro athlete side, this generation of pro athletes, coming in now, or the superstars now, they're really the ones who had that AAU kind of really start up, that movement start happening where the specialization kind of was happening more. And now
Yep.
when you look
Yep.
at the pro ball side, you have all these people doing rest days now left and right. And this was something that you wouldn't even think about back in the past.
Uh-huh.
So, Jerk, let me ask you, do you think this has to do more with the I guess miscommunication because now you're talking about what, five different coaches and still one PT guy or rehab guy if you're even lucky, like Doc said, because half these places don't even have certain clinics that work with you on the off season or whatnot.
I think specifically to the topic we were just talking about, and I love the fact that we dove into that because I remember seeing the article about it years ago of how a big issue in youth sports in particular when it comes to injuries is what Doc just broke down and sports specialization and us having athletes play just one sport at such a young age. And I think ultimately what it comes down to, and you were just talking about, is culture. And I think everything breaks down to the base. And I think the culture that these kids are brought up in to where I think the three of us can agree none of us were pushed to play just a single sport growing up. We all had interest in all sports. Now I wasn't any good at it, but I also had
I
a
was
little
about
bit
to
of
say.
baseball experience. Basketball's my main thing. I had a little bit of baseball in there, and for a
But
very brief fleeting moment, soccer. But
there you go.
it's best that even if you're not necessarily good at it, you're still moving your body around because
Right.
it's just good. Doc, specifically just based off of that, just a quick question. You mentioned you kind of you probably did break it down in your answer, but just like more simply for the people, like why is it that the sophomore junior year range is the best time for
Mm,
athletes to shift
yes.
to the specialization in their sport? Is it because they're closer to being like better equipped for it in that specific age range, or is there another reason?
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing is that at that point, once they're 16, 17, they're closer to full maturation as far as their body type. You know, they'll have more ideas or more of a sense of how their body is, how their body type is. Now, obviously, we know that, you know, once you get into college and things like that, things can still change for another couple of years, really till you cap out about 2021 is really when you kind of know where you're going to be at as far as height, weight, body type, all that good stuff. And so you want to make it to get to like you want to get to the closest point of being able to understand how your body works and how your body moves. And to do that, it has to be around that 15, 16-year-old age, because most of the times when you're seeing a lot of these kids, and another thing I kind of wanted to bring up a little bit too, just kind of feeding into this topic is the big thing is also parents too. Parents really sometimes when you're playing one sport, the parent played ball, baseball or football, whatever, and it's like, okay, my kid's doing that, and
The
so it
ultimate
all
coach.
stops. At all stops, they're trying to every step of the way trying to do that. And so the biggest thing is that you have to make sure that that kid is developing properly throughout, not just from a athletic standpoint, but just from a health standpoint, right? If their body's not moving right over time, that's going to break down, as we said. But the biggest thing is that I want enough time from when the athlete starts to play sports, whatever it is. You know, if they start at 3, 4, if they're playing like 4 or 5 years old playing t-ball or something like that, like whenever they start to actually do some kind of athletic activity, from that point, I want the most amount of time for them to pique their interest. You know, the first sport that they play may not even be what they do. It's like almost like everybody's played like rec soccer kind of thing. And it's like, well, does everybody continue to play soccer? No, they have other interests. Sometimes they play with their friends, things like that. They're young. They're trying to just be with their friends, right? But at the same time, you got to make sure that throughout that time, those 10 years that you have per se, if we're saying 5 to 15, within those 10 years, that they're actually doing something to try to change the way that they're moving, to try to be more athletic. Obviously not everybody's going to want to be an athlete or want to continue to play sports. So, that's not really for them. But if you're serious about playing in any sport, you have to make sure that your body can move right. Have you even played any other sports? You know how to move in other ways. And so that's where that kind of cutoff, that's why I like to have the most amount of time with these athletes, is because I want to make sure that when I tell, when they pick that sport, it's like, okay, well, everything is showing that you're ready to go to play that sport. So we can get you going. Now you can focus on specific things and things like that. But at early ages, you got to make sure that kid is playing multiple sports. That's for sure.
Is there ever a time where you watch a kid play, or a kid shows you a certain motion they do, and you look and you go like, no, we gotta correct that immediately. Like you just know it might be working at a young age, but as they develop, it's just gonna eventually lead to I guess a Markel Fultz situation, or you just know there's no way to avoid an injury coming if they continue, and you know, I
Yeah,
guess
I
the
mean,
athlete resists it as well.
yeah, you try to you try to see it, you try to screen an athlete, any athlete, as best as you can, and try to, it's predicting future injuries is never an easy thing. I mean, yes, I can say that, your body may be predisposed to an injury just because you're moving in this way. That may never happen. Or I may have the flip side situation where it's like, okay, this looks good. We could probably work on that a little bit more, which we will. And then come to find out they end up blowing out their knee or something like that. And so what you see is that sometimes you get to the point where, uh, you have to be able to bridge the gap as far as understanding that you're not going to predict everything. You're not going to be able to say, okay, yeah, you're definitely going to get a shoulder injury, you're definitely going to get an injury. What you need to bring is awareness. They just need to know that this could be a possibility. They need to know that working on this movement, sleep, diet, those are things that are always pushed to the back, because everything that's pushed to the front is everything commercial, like, hey, getting this new glove, batting gloves, this new football or these pads, blah, 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 all these things that will make you want to play better, or they're going to make you move better, faster, stronger, all that stuff. That's the stuff that's not immediately going to change it. Your ability to move, your ability to have good sleep, good diet, that's what's going to carry you on. And as far as longevity, and going back to like the Tom Brady and all that conversation, they spend millions of dollars on their body because they know that is their ticket to continue to keep playing, right? They don't, it's not like, 50 years ago where you had people smoking cigarettes at halftime. This just doesn't happen anymore. You know what I mean? It's not the way it is now. So, the biggest thing is making sure that, you're not going to predispose. You're not going to tell everybody that they're injury, that they could have an injury risk in the future. But what we have to do is just continue to bring that awareness, continue to bridge that gap, keep talking to these rehab professionals, keep talking to the coaches, have them talk together, and really just understand that teams that are run well and do not have a lot of injuries are the teams that are doing this. You just don't see it. The pro teams that have the least amount of injuries, that, they have a good rehab staff, everybody loves their rehab staff, you don't see what they actually do. You just know that you say, okay, only 2 players on that team got injured this year. You know what I mean? So there's something that they're doing that you're not seeing. You just don't. There's a curtain behind that we need to uncover. We need to make sure that these people see that, because if they see it, then they can believe in it. It's tough to tell you that you got to do all this stuff if, like, I tell you that and then it never gets done, or you never find a place that actually does it, because then there's your disconnect right there. Now you've already stopped that athlete from progressing and doing that. So they just need to be aware of what's going on. Once they're more aware, then they can actually have some understanding and basis behind it.
It's funny because we're talking about how the communication between you guys and the coaches needs to get stronger, but it's almost like you guys not calling you coaches, but the role you play is almost just like a coach because, you mentioned good organizations have good health and rehab, strength conditioning, and coaches, obviously. If you're a good
Yeah.
organization, you have a good front office. So you look at these bad organizations, let's say Houston or Texans, it almost seems like half their team is always injured. And, like you said, while I'm saying the doctors are almost like coaches in the role they play, it's you got to show results. It's if you're losing, you're not going to buy into a coach. So if you're getting injured,
Right.
you're not going to buy into whatever this doctor is telling you. And
Right.
that's also why people always say when, let's say there's a whole franchise overhaul, essentially, why don't expect results, or if a team gets injured a lot in that first year after they made that change in the rehab and strength and conditioning, there's a reason to it. And like we've been discussing, and we're bringing the awareness, like you said, everyone who's tuned in has heard. Literally, it's just all about communication. And if you're going from plan A from the former team, and now you're switching to this medical staff for plan B, you're just
Yeah.
leading to 2 different plans where I'm sure the people who got fired didn't talk to the people who got hired.
Right.
So,
Exactly. Yeah.
so
That's a big thing, though. It's the, when you have good organizations that are run well, they mesh, they have a camaraderie, they have an ability to kind of communicate. Now, obviously, when you want to talk about payroll and certain things like that, with certain teams having higher payrolls than others, having ability to get, better staff or whatever the case is. What you tend to see is that also players kind of are on their own. They kind of like, I'm not playing well, or hey, I'm not playing well and I'm barely even getting paid to do this right now. And I feel like I could go somewhere else and get paid more. You get a lot of that autonomy from the athlete, which, don't get me wrong, I love that they have the ability to try to, maneuver around and get to other teams if they want to. But you also have to factor that in, especially into the pros, where when it comes to an effort level, sometimes people are just like, what, they're injured, or they kind of do something where it's like, what, I'm not getting paid enough to kind of go through this and really realize it. Or the flip side, where you got somebody who got injured, who's getting paid, top dollar, and they're like, what, I'm getting paid top dollar. I'm not if I don't get back to rehabbing it, if I don't get back to the field, if I don't get back to the court. And so you see that on that spectrum as well, where you see that they're motivated by other things. And I think that that's why we have to tap into this early on. We have to go back to the young kids. We have to go back to the middle school, high school, the elementary school kids that are playing sports, because there is no financial incentive there. There is nothing there that they're looking at that playing their sport is going to get them at that level. Now, yes, they see it on TV, they see it in the media, but they obviously know they're not at that point yet. They're very young still. So that's why we got to tap into that, because if they can just have that mindset going forward, then now as they get better, faster, stronger, now they see other things, they haven't forgotten how they got to that point. But you gotta tap into it at that point, because once you try to talk to these kids that are already in college, that are already about to, try to get to the pros, things like that, they've already had their kind of mental makeup. They kind of know what they are, they know who they are, their attitude with different things. And so that's why you got to get them when they're younger, because that's what's going to help them to develop and progress better than if we try to like just hammer it in right at the college level, where it's like a lot of those guys are already it's set in their ways. So it's tough at times.
It's almost like the crazy part is nowadays you could use that money as an inspiration to the high school kids, because now with NIL deals, it's it's very possible you go to college
It's seeping down.
Exactly, it's coming,
and you're gonna
slowly.
You're going to see it a lot with the NIL, and you're seeing some of these numbers that are thrown around. We're talking in the millions, for some of these 4 or 5 star recruits, different things like that. And so that, I think, could almost bring a little bit more of sports specialization, more so on the football end, because this is where it's really being like heavily advertised, and you're seeing the big money kind of flowing around in football. That's where that could start to be like, okay, man, you know what? I got to, start playing ball or football, and I got to do this stuff. I got to get my tape going, because I got to, make sure we're going. So, that's what you also see too. NIL definitely could have some iffy effects on what's going on with the youth, for sure.
If the NCAA is already terrified of what it could do there, now just imagine it goes even but hey, maybe to a certain extent, if kids do get their hands on this medical knowledge, maybe it'll actually help them in the long run if they can understand.
They gotta make sure it's there.
And I think, Doc, a perfect way to kind of summarize a lot of what we talked about here is like a big reason why this is something that needs to be brought to the forefront is, to me, the 2 big M's. Because despite the fact that we live in the age of ultimate information now, where you can get all this stuff on your phone, we literally have these little mini computers in our hands to be able to do this.
Absolutely.
We are doing this all on laptops, where we could search this stuff and learn about this. But despite being in the age of information, there's still so much misinformation and so much miscommunication that is out there that ultimately it stops this. And the people that ultimately are hurt the most are these young athletes, are these high school kids that suffer these injuries, are these college kids who maybe even they had the slightest of shots at pros, even if it's not in North America, even if it is in Europe or another league, their hopes can get dashed like that, because them and the people that were trying to help them just weren't aware enough of this. And I really think that something like this is important to get out there, because I look at it at the professional football level. You have the XFL and the USFL. It's just more football for people to be able to play. Now NIL happening in college, really mainly for football, but I think there are small pockets of opportunities for other sports here. And then all around the world, there's soccer, baseball, and basketball leagues. There's so much more of an opportunity to be able to make some sort of living at this, and that the more information we put in these kids' hands at a younger age, and the people around them to hopefully do right by them, I think that's only going to make it better. And Bar said it best, and he's going to ultimately wrap us up here, but I'm so very thankful that you are here to help give this information to the people, because this is stuff that like not everyone realizes how important it is, and it only takes someone
Yeah.
like yourself like to want to bring it up, be like, hey, we need to have more of a focus here.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you normally don't see it until you're injured. That's when you start looking up a lot of things. But most people will not do that on their off time.
Yeah, and it's just like anything in sports. You want to come in prepared, like you said. You don't want
Yeah.
to start looking this stuff up after the fact. You want to be proactive, not reactive. But Doc, as Jerk said, thank you very much for coming in. We need to have you again soon, just to educate the people. It's always
Absolutely. I'm
just
always
I
ready.
feel big brained when you're here. It's just I feel so much smarter at the end of the episode.
Yeah.
Like just I could keep going on and on for hours,
We
essentially.
could talk. I love this stuff, man. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we gotta have you on sooner than later. We're gonna talk about it after the show, but thank you again. Is there anything we've been talking about spreading awareness? I'm pretty sure I've seen you on a couple Instagram videos showing some exercises or not. So if you'd like, go ahead, drop that info for the people to follow and check you out on to learn more about all things just like this, or things how to improve just their general health in life.
Absolutely. So, biggest thing I would say, follow Bardonia Physical Therapy on all your social medias, Instagram and Facebook. That's where I'll be posting a bunch of videos, a bunch of my coworkers, and all the stuff that we talked about today when it comes to injury prevention, all that good stuff. All that information is there. So, go check it out. Go check out that Instagram, Bardonia PT. You'll see my face there, and you'll see me kind of just giving information to the masses. And another shout out to the Bergen Black Sox, my AAA team. We're 5-0, baby. We just won that doubleheader yesterday, so we're ready to go.
Shout out to the Bergen Black Sox. You know
That's
what?
it,
Like, what can
baby.
I say, man? I've been a fan since day one, quite
That's
literally.
right. That's right.
I haven't been to a game yet. Haven't been to a game. Gotta make it out. But I've been a fan since day one. Doc, thank you very much, man, once again for joining us. You take care now. All right.
Absolutely.
Jerg, I cut him off right when he was saying absolutely.
Come
Jerg,
on,
man.
bars.
Man, when you leave me with hanging up on people, I'm quick with it. I got a quick trigger. But man, as we do with every interview, I just wanted to get your thoughts on like how you feel, man. Aside from big brained and just learning, and I get excited, like this is things where if you told almost like these high school athletes we were talking about, if you told me about any of this in high school or a couple years ago, I would have been like, okay, yeah. But once you start actually diving deep into it, it's just really eye opening stuff, man.
Yeah, well, first off, like we've only had him on twice. We need to have him on more. I learned something. I learned several things new every single time the good doctor comes on. Like he is just absolutely amazing with his information. And I think the best part about Doc is that he's so entertaining, man. Like he's got such an amazing personality. It's
Oh
like
yeah.
you want to listen to this guy talk. It's like I don't know how much this happened to you, Bars, but at least like for me in middle and high school in NYC, they bring in like public speakers sometimes to just talk about various topics. And I'm gonna be real with you, NYC public school system. Some of those people are drier than a saltine cracker in the Sahara Desert. It's not good. But Doc is the complete 180 of that, where it's like he's giving you this information. He knows what he's talking about. But like we were having fun with it. We were being serious with it. But we were making the environment of like this is important, but we're not going to bore you to death. Like this is information that's vital, and you're getting it the way that you should get it. And I think that's very critical when it comes to doing this stuff, because, and as sad as it is to say, it's the presentation of a message is really what matters the most. Not the core of the message. It's the presentation that really is the first thing that gets looked at and scrutinized. And I think that, Doc, as per usual, he's batting 1,000. Well, just like his team's record so far, he's absolutely batting 1,000 here, and he really did teach us a lot. And I think this issue is something to continue to look at going forward at all levels. But I think especially like we touched it at the very end. I think in a future episode we need to bring him back on to talk about the everlasting effects of what this could end up being. But
Yeah.
NIL and what this could do, man, and how it could maybe start affecting the high school levels and going into the collegiate levels. I think even the lower division schools as well. Like I think Division 2 and Division 3 kids are going to make out like they could get opportunities here with NIL. I think this is something to keep a close eye on in regards to that. And I think just at the end of the day, what we talked about, we want resources to be spread out, and we want schools to use these resources in the right way for their student athletes. Like that's just what that's all we're asking for. And when the thing is that when you claim to be about it, When you claim to care about your student athletes so much, like you got to prove it. And exactly what Doc was talking about, just opening the communication more. We're not asking for anything crazy. Just open the communication more, make this more available to the athletes if you can. In the age now, bars, where we're doing this via computer. I've never met bars in person in real life.
It was
But
wild,
we
to be
have done,
honest.
but we have done so many episodes like this. We've had Doc on a couple times now. Like, you can do this stuff via, electronic means. I hate to sound like old there, but you can do this stuff via, these means, Zoom, FaceTiming, all these other stuff. We're getting to a point now where there are no more excuses to allow this negligence to happen, and I think we need to really start holding people way more accountable for this in today's age, when this information is out there, when there are amazing people like Doc that can share it to us, and when there are ways where I think he brought a good point. It's not physically close to everyone, but you can call for it. You can get online presentations. We are getting to the point where there are no more excuses. So let's see this implemented now.
I think what makes him really a great communicator and spreading the knowledge is he deals with these young high school kids, and he told us they're not really always willing to buy into the whole motive of it. You got to break it down, explain. You don't even really got to break it down to them. You got to tell them what the main goal is, and that's really what opened our eyes here. Was he sent us that text explaining exactly what he wanted done. He sent us that clip of the Ryan Russello show that you were speaking of with Jordan Palmer on it, and that hooked me in immediately. I was like, yeah, let's do it. I was like, it wasn't even the whole episode. It was literally a 2-minute clip he sent us. And I was like, this is definitely something I could take a deeper dive into. So it's just really, when you get it broken down so simple, and it's I don't want to say layman's terms, because he really did break it down into something more than layman's terms. He got more definitive than that. He explained every reason why something would go. That NIL episode is definitely something we got to bring him back in for. I'm mad that we just hooked that in at the end, but we are pressing for time here. But other than that,
Hey,
man,
it's like the Jordan Palmer thing, just a couple minutes, but it's going to be expanded upon
that's
bars.
it. That's it. Like I said, I'm gonna reach out to him. We're definitely gonna have him back on soon. But man, what an episode! I just want to remind the people that this is the first episode of a doubleheader this week. So don't be afraid to tune in again this Thursday, and we're having our NFL draft reaction. I'm having a couple guests on. It's gonna be me and Jake. The Iceman's gonna sit this one out. He's a busy man. He got VOs to cut and everything else. But we are having Couch Coach of the Off the Ball Network. Great friends over there. So I can't wait. It's going to be a blast, man. So be sure to tune in. And last but not least, guys, you guys did good with, adding a couple follows and whatnot, but we need the reviews. 5 stars and reviews is the mission for this episode. I want to see at least a couple reviews there, a couple 5 stars. Like I said, tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like. Let us know what we're doing wrong. We're here for you, the people. But once again, it was a beautiful night to talk about sports injuries and movements and the body in general, particularly today. But, Jerg, I can't wait to see you until next week, bud. And until then, guys, 5 stars, reviews, peace.